Do you want to learn how to play variations and even improvise on the third surdo? Of course, this is a huge subject, and in my opinion, there's an infinite number of possible variations that can be created and played on the third surdo, ways of varying, and styles of playing the third surdo. And in this video, I'm going to teach you one of the most common and typical variations played on the third surdo in the context of Rio's Samba school baterias, which of course means that we can hear this variation being played in baterias the world over. It's a super common, typical, standard variation. It may be the first variation that a third surdo player may learn. It's usually the first variation that I'll teach my students on the third surdo. And if you're a third surdo player, in my opinion, it's essential for you to know this variation. So in my experience in Rio's Samba school tradition, this variation is known by at least a couple of different names. I've heard it referred to as the Corte, C-O-R-T-E, which means the cut, which comes from the Portuguese verb cortar, which means to cut, because when we're playing this variation, we're literally cutting the rhythm in half. We're playing on the and of every beat like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. This variation is also sometimes known as the Subida, which comes from the Portuguese verb subir, which means to rise up or ascend. And I would translate the word subida in this context as an entrance pattern, because when the bateria restarts its rhythm, for example, after a virada or a turnaround phrase, or after a chamada or call on the lead repinique or repinikis, the third surdo will typically play some kind of entrance pattern. And very often this entrance pattern or subida will involve this cutting figure, okay? So sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, corte, subida, but technically the subida doesn't have to be the cutting pattern. It doesn't have to be just the cutting pattern, but it very often will involve the cutting pattern, at least in the beginning of the phrase, okay? So let's jump right into this variation. As I said, the basic idea of the variation is that we're playing on the and of every beat. As Gabriel Lopes observes in his excellent book, Fundamentals of a Samba School Bateria, this variation often occurs at the beginning of the first part of the samba and the beginning of the second part of the samba, directly after a virada in the samba enredo, which is the style of samba that the samba schools perform. And it often appears during the refrains of the samba enredo, which very typically there's a refrain in the first part and a refrain in the second part. This variation doesn't have to be used only in those situations. It can be used in other situations, but it very typically is used in those situations. So as I said, it's essential for you to know this variation if you're going to be a third surdo player in the samba school style. So let's jump right into the variation itself. Very often it occurs in a 2-measure phrase. So if we're coming into the corte after a virada, we're going to play the virada, which is on the and of 2 and the end of 4 together with the first surdo. 1 and of 2 and 3, 4 and 1. On that next one, that's where the variation will start, okay? So let's say we're going to go into the first part of the samba, the A section of the song, and we're going to start with a virada. 1 and of 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 E O 1. That's a very typical format for the corte, a 2-measure phrase. Okay, so after the virada, we're going to play the and of 1, the and of 2, the and of 3, and the and of 4 in the first measure. And in the second measure, we're going to play the and of 1, the and of 2, the and of 3, and on beat 4, we're going to play the E and the for E, and that's our signal that we're going back to our basic pattern, whatever pattern that may be. Okay, so let's try that again after the virada. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and a 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 E O 1. On that next one is where we're going to start our basic pattern. And for the purposes of this lesson, let's use the pattern that I referred to as basic pattern number 1 in the video that I posted previously here to the channel called 2 Patterns You Need to Know in the Third Surdo, or something like that. I forget the exact title. I think that's it. So if you're new to the third surdo, definitely check out that video first and then come back and join us here. Okay, so that pattern, just for review, goes like this: 1, 2, and 3, 4 E, O 1, 2 and 3, 4 E, So let's use what I consider to be the most common song form for the samba enredo, in which we have a first part and a second part. And we're gonna launch into the groove with a virada. We're gonna play our 2-measure corte for the first part of the samba. Then we're gonna play 3 measures of our basic pattern, and then we're gonna play a virada to go into the second part of the samba. And for the second part of the samba, the B section of the song, we're gonna do the same thing. Of course, this is just a kind of generic way of incorporating this variation and and just doing a very simple even number of measures, because just so you can learn the variation. But in an actual samba enredo, of course, you would be playing the length of the first, you'd be playing, let's say, your 2-measure corte, then the length of the first part, and then however long that is, however many measures that is, and that'll vary from song to song, of course, and then we'll play the virada going into the second part, and so forth and so on. So this is just a kind of very generic way to learn this variation, okay? So we're gonna do the virada, go into the first part of the samba with the 2-measure corte, 3 measures of basic pattern number 1, a virada to go into the second part, and then we're gonna do the same thing there, 2-measure corte, 3 measures of basic pattern number 1, a virada to go back to the first part, 2-measure corte, 3 measures of our basic pattern number 1, and then a final virada to end, okay? So let's do that, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and a 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2, 3, 4, da-ga-da-ga-da, boom, boom, second part, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2, 3, 4, da-ga-da-ga-da, bum, bum, first part, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2, 3, 4, da-ga-da-ga-da, bum, bum. Okay? Now let's learn how to play this 2-measure corte starting after a chamada or call on the lead repique or lead repiques. And it's going to come in a little differently. Instead of coming in right away on the and of 1, we're going to come in with a 2 and, or just the and of 2. So for example, like this. Let's say the call is like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 equal 1. Okay? So instead of going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, like we do after a virada, after a chamada, we're going to go 2 and 3 and 4 and in the first measure, and then the second measure is the same. Okay? So let's do this whole samba enredo sequence now, starting with a chamada. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2, 3, 4, da-ga-da-ga-da, boom, boom, second part, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2, 3, 4, da-ga-da-ga-da, boom, boom, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2 and 3, 4 equal 1, 2, 3, 4, da-ga-da-ga-da, boom, boom. Okay, so there you have it. The 2-measure corte variation played through the most common song form of the samba enredo, which involves a first part and a second part, coming in after a virada and coming in after a chamada. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you would like to delve deeper into the third Surdo, we have a course on the Samba New York Online Academy called Third Surdo Basics, okay, which will cover the corte and so many other fundamentals of playing the third Surdo in the style of Rio Samba schools. So definitely check that out. There's a 7-day free trial. Just go to sambanewyorkonlineacademy.teachable.com. I also offer private coaching, so you can email me at info@sambanewyork.com if you'd like to study the third Surdo or any other Samba percussion instrument with me. And with that, I'll leave you here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.